You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series.
Hello and welcome back, everybody, to round 2 of the Eternal Tournament Series, the 5th weekly for Season 3. I'm once again joined by Truedawn, and we are about to jump into a pretty sweet matchup versus Mezmorizor on Colorless Blue versus JanCel on FJS Armory.
Yeah, we've seen the Callous Blue deck a couple weeks ago. It has been refined and evolved since that point. This deck looks a bit cleaner. I still think the Wisdom of the Elders from Double Blue is a bit loose, but the rest of everything looks great. The Cliffside Porters synergizing well with all the sacrifice outlets, and also Smuggler's Stash that allows you to essentially echo it again, get 2 more. So the deck has a lot of fodder for all of its synergies.
Yeah, it really does. Wisdom of the Elders is definitely an interesting inclusion, since that double primal is very hard to hit, but it does give the deck very necessary card draw. JanCel, on the other hand, here is playing what looks like a fairly standard Armory list. We do see him with 2 Icarias instead of 1, and a Sword of the Sky King, which hasn't been included in a lot of lists recently, but I have a feeling some of the nerfs made Sword of the Sky King a little bit more necessary.
The biggest change from this build of Armory from past builds is it no longer runs Steward of the Past, at least not in the main deck. The influence change to Steward of the Past, now being double shadow instead of single shadow, makes it much harder for Armory to cast on a consistent basis. So losing that card is a big game. Like, that blocker was really what that deck wanted. So we'll see how Armory fares without as many creatures to block for their weapons as we move into one.
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely a notable loss from the deck. Steward of the Past was putting in a lot of work, and we see Mezmorizor here picking up a very awkward hand out of the start. Going to at least have something to drop here in these Cliffside Porters if he chooses, but not holding any fire influence. Going to be unable to play this Grenadin Drone or these torches. Also, just very light on his game plan. Got some units, but nothing to do with them.
And this is the cost you pay when you add a third color to a deck that doesn't have a lot to find that extra color. So there is a cost to adding additional power to your deck in this game. You can't just like free roll additional cards. Sometimes things like this happen, and you get punished for running an ostensibly greedy deck.
Yeah, and we see JanCel answering on turn 2. Mezmorizor's a very slow start with the Rakano Artisan, and Mezmorizor here, unfortunately, still not hitting power, picking up another Cliffside Porter instead. Just going to go ahead and pass his turn, and that's not a great start for the Callous deck. You would really like to get off to a nice start with a lot of units on the board.
Yeah, it's actually pretty challenging for Armory to deal with a lot of units early. It makes their weapons very bad. It puts them in a spot where they have to have Harsh Rule, and frequently it's not super profitable to spend a Harsh Rule on like a Grenadin Drone and like a Cliffside Porter. Usually it's not a 2-for-1 or certainly not a 3-for-1. You're not getting a huge amount of value from it. So Metaphor not being able to do that, Mezmorizor's not being able to do that, sorry, really hampers his game plan. We do see him find red here, so we'll see if he was actually able to start doing something, turning his star or spinning stars.
Yeah, I think he's considering playing this quarry, but I would honestly like. I think I'm more in favor of the Grenadin Drone. I have a feeling JanCel probably has a weapon coming down in the next turn or so. So I'd like to keep the Grenadin Drone down here and hold the torch up. But we see Mezmorizor elect to go ahead and quarry. Going to take this torrent of spiders.
And leaving the torch down only really punishes you against sort of Icaria, or Runehammer is the 4-drop weapon, which is invulnerable, so you can't torch it anyway. So there's not a lot that punishes him for leaving it down here. It does allow him to use his mana more efficiently. So I think it's completely reasonable to do it the way he did.
Yeah, that is fair. I forgot that, of course, Runehammer going to be invulnerable. Definitely one of its strengths when you play it, not being able to get torched right away. Ruin or Decay will still stop it, but obviously Mezmorizor not going to have any ruins in his main board. Curious if he has them in the sideboard.
Yeah. Sorry, Genel does have the ruins in the sideboard. He has 3. But
yeah, JanCel does, but no, not a Mezmorizor.
Not a Mezmorizor, yeah. This Torrent of Spiders is likely going to be one of the more important cards in the matchup. It is a very good follow-up to Harsh Rule and also holds most of JanCel's creatures, except for Ikaria, which he is running 2 of. So that's a way for Memoirs to rebuild after a Harsh Rule, which JanCel is going to have to deploy at some point if he ever wants to attack with a weapon. Although it's possible he doesn't need to. He could just win with some things like Ikaria.
Yeah, and out of Mezmorizer, this is going to be an interesting. It's going to be an interesting time. Like he's definitely holding these cliffside porters, trying to play around Harsh Rules and the like, trying to wait for the Callus. He's taking a little bit of incidental damage here. I'm curious as to what JanCel felt the need to rise for, and with the Throne Warden coming down, actually, I'm having a feeling it might be a Stone Scar Maul if he included one in the list. I hope he has one in the list.
He does not. He's playing Starsteel Dice Show. Anyone familiar with my stream knows I'm not. I think Maul is a much better card than Dice Show. Just generally, we may see the drawback bear out here in this matchup, but even if he rose for a Ikaria, that's still going to be a very potent card. Dice Show, even in this spot with as much armor as he has, can start mowing down these tokens at a pretty reasonable clip. So I think that Mezmorizer is so far behind and his board is so anemic that really anything is going to be able to allow him to make some pretty solid forward progress.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually a proponent of splitting the Dice Show. I generally like one Dice Show and one Stone Scar Maul. Just because I think in Armory, since you are playing Rise of the Challenge, you are allowed a little bit more freedom with what threats you play, since you do have Rise of the Challenge, to seek them up. So I like kind of having the toolbox where you can fish out whatever you need, while it does hamper consistency a little bit.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. It looks like what took the Stone Scar Maul's place in this deck list is the Sword of the Sky King. We do see a Ikaria, although it wasn't what he rised for. It's just a 5-power Ikaria, so we have yet to see what that Rise of the Challenge hit, but it may not matter because this Ikaria is just I don't know how it dies.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for him to kill. Since JanCel actually hasn't played anything currently, I have to imagine that maybe it was Sword of the Sky King he went and fetched up.
That is certainly possible. It's the only thing he wouldn't have played to this point. If he did Ikaria, he probably would have done the higher damage one first. Although maybe not. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what he rises for, if that even ends up mattering in this game.
Yeah, it's looking like it's not going to matter a lot. We're probably going to need to see Torrent of Spiders get played down here, even if it is just for what I think will be 2 spiders. Or maybe even 1, actually, yeah, because I don't know if he has enough units in his yard yet, and don't think he does, in fact.
Yeah, it's playing very conservatively earlier, which was weird considering he had the Torrent. But he wanted, there's only 1 spider as you see him hover over that. So you wanted to convert the porters into Death Touch spiders, I would have thought, but here we see just not be able to do it. Although he can just chump block with all of this nonsense on the board and then make like 2 or 3 spiders. But again, none of this stuff deals with the real threat in the game, that Ikaria flying overhead.
Yeah, he's going to need to find Combust. And on top of that, we like we noted, we still haven't seen JanCel's Rise card, which is likely a weapon. So waiting on that as well. We see Balak's coming out here for Mezmorizer, going to go ahead and take care of these Recano Artisans. But a lot of his board gets cleaned up in the process, and this Ikaria is still chunking away.
Yeah. I was going to say, if Daisho was the card he got, it is going to be lethal here. So
yeah, and Daisho, very nice there. So not picking up the Stone Scar Maul since it isn't in his deck, but fishing out the other 6-drop weapon that is, in some cases, just as efficient.
Yeah, I think he could have really risen for anything there, and it would have been enough. It was just Memorizor's was just not able to deal with any of JanCel's proactivity. And as we move to sideboard, I'm not sure it gets a whole much better. We do see 3 Sabotage, 1 Suffocate, 2 Annihilate, 3 Treachery, 4 Feeding Time, 1 Oblivion Spike, and 1 Stash in the sideboard. I'd really like to see the discard spells, the Sabotage and the Treachery. I'm not sure how he set up his deck to sideboard, how many slots he's available to take out of his deck, because his deck is so synergistic. Anything he's bringing out is likely to erode that strategy. But both Sabotage and Treachery are cards I'm very interested in this matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you are you do touch on something very important in that Callus is a deck that is very synergistic, so it is very hard for them to find cards that they're really keen on pulling out. He would love to, probably put in all 3 sabotages. Maybe, I don't think I'd drop in 3 treacheries, but probably like 2. But still, finding 5 sideboard slots in a deck that's as combo heavy as Mezmorizor's can be quite a challenge. We see him pulling out a Madness here, and really trying to figure out what goes to make room.
Yeah, because if you look at his deck, it's literally like just payoffs and creatures, with the exception being like Torch and Suffocate and Wisdom of the Elders. Like everything else is either something to fuel a payoff or a payoff. So there's very little wiggle room here to sideboard.
Yeah, that is the unfortunate part about playing these combo-esque decks, that they really do rely on heavy synergy. JanCel, on the other hand, playing Armory. Let's check his sideboard out. He's got 3 Ruins, 2 Vanquishes, a Valkyrie Enforcer, 2 Furnace Mages, 3 Stewards of the Past, a Smuggler's Stash, 2 Stray in the Shadows, and Jack himself. So I have to imagine we'll probably see some cards like maybe Stray, although it is a little hard to cast on his power base. Things like Steward, if he can also fit that in here, just hose down the recursion strategy from the Callus deck.
I'd also envision some number of either Ruins or Furnace Mage. I'm not sure which one you want more here to deal with large Calluses. Those are something you can lose to potentially. But yeah, it's weird to see Steward and Stray in the sideboard. Because they're both very powerful cards. Steward especially you'd like to main deck, and I don't know what's changing mana-wise that allows Steward to come in post board, but we'll see if he brings it in, if it works out, as we move into game 2.
Well, no power in the sideboard means no power changes coming, so hopefully he will just be able to handle those changes. But yes, we will see as we jump into game 2. Mezmorizer, with another hand lacking fire off the bat again, does at least have Callus in his hand if he can find some fire influence and some Cliffside Porters to sack to that Callus.
And this is the interesting thing about the blue Callus deck, because in order to play the Porters, they actually cut things like Slumbering Stone and Dark Wisp, which, while like anemic creatures do like block in the early game, you can they actually present a relevant body, whereas Cliffside Porter just like might as well not be in play unless it's fueling just like Devour or Callus or whatever. So he has these proactive plays, but they're not actually proactive.
Yeah, it is weird, the dynamic that the Cliffside Porter takes. It basically is a unit you're playing exclusively to sacrifice to these Combust and Devour type effects, and to sacrifice to the Callus and fuel the yard. But it's not as aggressive or as sticky, you could say, as the Slumbering Stones. And Dark Wisp, obviously, cycling itself is pretty important, but not going to see that here. We do see Sabotage out of Mezmorizer, and I'm a little surprised, honestly, he didn't Sabo last turn. Wanted to opt for this Devour instead, but...
Yeah, he was very weak to Sword of Ikaria in that turn, and we did see Sword of Ikaria come down, and now he's probably going to Sabotage this turn in Cliffside Porter, but anything that Sabotage can hit now is not going to be relevant for a while. He already has a weapon in play, so any weapons in his hand don't matter as much, and we're pretty far away from Harsh Rule mattering, so he's probably going to Sabotage this turn, but it would have been a lot better last turn, like preventing this sort of Ikaria from ever coming into the game.
Yeah, that's kind of what I found curious, is like I always feel that when you have Sabotage against Armory, 2 is often the very best turn to play it before they can actually put down any of their weapons. You can really get a free shot at Sword of Ikaria or a Grunehammer or Starsteel Daisho. Just anything important in their hand you can rip out before they can put it down. But we did see JanCel getting the Sword of Ikaria down on turn 3, and Mezmorizer not having a fire influence going to have a lot of problems. Missing power on his last turn as well.
If he does draw fire influence, though, he's kind of in an okay spot. He gets to torch the Sword of Ikaria, play some Grenadin drones, possibly also Sabotage that turn. And it's interesting that he elected to play both Porters with the Sabotage last turn, because again, turn 4 is the Rise to the Challenge turn. So if he gets to Rise for something like Ikaria, a card that you're very weak to, that could be a big deal. So he's being a little bit conservative with this Sabotage. We'll see if that ends up costing him or he ends up getting paid off for it. It's certainly an interesting way to play the game.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting, and I feel like I feel like, yeah, you need to get that Sabo off at some point. I mean, you can put another Cliffside Porter in play here, but it's really just not doing anything. And we see Mezmorizer just opt for the third option altogether, which was pass his turn. And he's really just putting this on JanCel to, kind of take this game into his own hands and find a way to end it.
I feel like Mezmorizer might be saving the Sabotage to follow up a Rise to the Challenge, but that seems loose to me because one of the better cards to get with Rise to the Challenge is Akari in this matchup. So they could Rise, you Sabotage, then like don't see a weapon, and then you're like, oh, they got Akaria, and then what do you do?
Yeah, interesting you note that. Like, I had considered that, but I figure, with the Sabotage, you may as well just go ahead and grab the Rise itself, since, yeah, I would assume JanCel will respect the Sabotage and probably pull Akaria with Rise.
And this turn is super awkward for Mezmorizer because he's held the Sabotage for so long. If he wants to use it this turn, he can't Wisdom. It's his whole turn to Sabotage. And if he Wisdoms, again, he's not doing the Sabotage. So he elects to Sabotage, but because he held it for so long, it's now his whole turn. This is essentially a 3-mana Sabotage.
Yeah, this is very awkward. I wish he had just done this last turn instead. And he goes ahead and takes the Ruin off, which, makes sense. Makes it so this Callus is protected once it eventually comes down. But Mezmorizer's got the issue of, just getting it into play. And all the while, we haven't really mentioned it very much, but this sort of Akari has been cracking away. And these Warcry triggers are really stacking up if JanCel hasn't drawn a weapon yet.
Yeah, Armory always loves when they get to stick sort of Akaria, just like have it. Even if a Warcry is twice, it did its job. And the fact that it's been in play for 4 turns, like Warcrying a bunch of stuff, and we saw in JanCel's hand was 2 Harsh Rule, a Torch, and the Ruin, so we knew his full hand. So whatever has gotten Warcried it's all gone onto one target, and if that is a large weapon, you could see Mezmorizer just get punked out of this game.
Yeah, ooh, and a quarry, even better, might get to take that weapon at a reduced cost. So if that's a Sword of the Sky King, for example, that might now be a 7 cost. I don't even know how many Warcry triggers we're actually at. I want to say it's about 6 or 7, but it's really hard to tell.
You see a Madness, which it doesn't matter a lot right now. It could in the future. But I would like... This is an awkward spot for Mezmorizer because he knows about the 2 Harsh Rules. He really wants to start extending out tokens to fuel this Callus. But if he just plays the assembly line, that's you probably can only play 1 assembly line this turn. I think you can't play assembly line Grenadin Drone. I think that's too much of an extension. But assembly line by itself kind of is good against the Harsh Rule. It's actually a 2-for-1 in favor of Mezmorizers. So I think that's a reasonable way to like kind of parse out your threats for this turn. You could even have the mana up to bolt the sort of Akaria doing that way.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is that I definitely like getting the assembly line down here, I think, as the best line of play, since you do have this Torch to follow it up. Interesting to... I'm curious as to why he was considering the Grenadin Drone over the assembly line, but he does end up going for the assembly line in the end, and he's just going to Torch right away. I actually not a fan of that. I think you've already seen about 6 or 7 Warcries come down. I think you'd rather JanCel spend his turn swinging with the weapon so that he can't re-equip and swing with a much worse weapon. For example, like a Die Show coming down here, or a Sword of the Sky King.
Well, I think it's fine because your Torch isn't going to interact with any of the bigger weapons, and if they have Throne Warden, it's kind of a bit of a blowout for you. So I think it's fine. I don't know what else the Torch is doing. Like, yeah, this 8/7 comes down, but the Torch wasn't going to be able to do anything about that anyway. Although the Torch could have hit the Valkyrie, which then clears the way for a Grenadin Drone Callus turn this turn, which would have killed the weapon. So maybe that's the downside.
Yeah, something like that. Mainly what I was thinking is just that, he was going to swing with the 3/2 weapon anyway, so you can blow that up, and then you force JanCel to equip a weapon essentially naked. He's not going to be able to swing with it. Either way, though, not going to matter much here. Mezmorizer in a sticky situation currently, trying desperately to find a way to take care of this 8/5 Sword of Akaria. And he will have a bunch of tokens to put up in front of it, but JanCel obviously holding this Harsh Rule, ready to take control of the board back at a moment's notice.
It looks like the play is considering his Grenadin Drone combusts Callus, but that doesn't make the Callus big enough. I think he needs to either assembly line or Grenadin Drone this turn. Just chump block the 8 power weapon, and the next turn build to a place where you can play a bunch of tokens, callous an empty board, crack back on the weapon, and then you have like a very large weapon versus an empty board.
Yeah, and I kind of actually really like this combust here out of Mezmorizor. He really does respect that he knows the harsh rule is there, so he knows he was sitting on a virtual 1 health with that Valkyrie Enforcer in play. So now he's at least at 4, which is out of torch range, which is, you know, not something to be understated when you're playing against these armory decks. Sometimes they need just that little bit of reach to finish you off.
And here we see he's going to... See, this is where we're not playing the assembly line earlier, but it was awkward because he can only make this Callus a 4/4, which isn't enough to kill the weapon. So he has to play the assembly line now. He can actually play both. One gets eaten, then he can crack back with the Callus. So he's actually in a reasonable spot. JanCel is in a top deck mode. So Mezmorizor has navigated this game to a reasonable spot.
Yeah, Mezmorizor has definitely gotten this back to a very reasonable spot, I must say. It really will depend on what that last card is. Obviously not a harsh rule, or we would have seen him just take the game right there. Very curious as to what that last card is, be it power or just another weapon.
Yeah, these Warcry triggers have been going every turn of the game, so it's a big weapon, and we do see Mezmorizor. I actually don't know if I like pulling the trigger on Callus here, because now if they have a big weapon and you know it's big because there are so many Warcry triggers, it just cracks back on you, and then you're on nothing.
Oh, I mean, Furnace Mage. Whew.
Yeah, like the Grenin could have attacked in and killed the weapon themselves, and then you could have just left like 4 Grenin in play and see what happens. But now he gets kind of like the first mage is going to be good regardless, but I think he left himself open to a big weapon when he didn't need to.
Yeah, I think he did as well. Important to note, I would have liked to just see him get in with the Grenadins anyway, since, you know, it is just 4 missed damage that he's not getting back. So just a slight error there, but nothing that's going to... Well, that mistake alone will not kill him. We'll put it that way.
So this Sword of Icaria coming back off the Smuggler stash should be lethal. Sword kills the Grenin, first mage comes in, or whichever order.
Yeah, it doesn't particularly matter at this point. We are going to see JanCel assuredly wrapping up this second game.
It's interesting to see a... usually you'd think a token deck has a reasonable matchup against Armory because the weapons are so bad against wide boards. But neither of those like games seem particularly close. There was like that flash towards the end of that game where Mezmorizor got to a good spot. But even then, he was trying to just fade whatever got Warcried. It's weird that matchup isn't bad for Armory.
Yeah, I think it is very actually bad for Armory. What I think was the real killer in that matchup is something that I know you had touched on a little bit, which is playing Callus as a 3-color deck is often very hard, and running into those power issues is really what is going to hamper and ultimately defeat the deck more than what your opponent is doing. If you can't enact your game plan on time, you are going to have serious problems. And we saw that highlighted in both of those games there, definitely in the second game as well. Even though we did see Mezmorizor's plans start to come together, it took him way too many turns to actually get there.
Yeah, your deck is already trying to assemble like A plus B with like the tokens and the payoffs. And now you're making it so your mana also needs to come together. So you're just compounding inconsistency on inconsistency, and that's generally not a good place to be.
Yeah, it does make it really, really awkward. That much is certainly true. It's hard to say much more than that besides like kind of just losing the match, to that unfortunate power. Unfortunate there for Mezmorizor. I definitely think that matchup is honestly favored for him, but we definitely did not see it showcased there. So unfortunate as it is. We're trying to get a backup match for you all in the meantime, but unfortunately, I think both of our backup matches just finished. So I think we will go to a break in just a second. But before we do, I would like to give you guys a little information about the ETS tournament structure. I know this section is often long, so we've decided to cut it down this time. So let me give you all the brief summary. So the Eternal Tournament structure, as you all know, obviously we host these weekly tournaments, which allow you to qualify for our bi-monthly invitationals. So for those of you who don't know, that means we run an invitational every 2 months. We have 7 weeks of weeklies in which we take the top 4 of your results. And those invitational points qualify you for positions in our bi-monthly cash prized invitationals, as well as if you finish top 2 in any of our weekly opens, you get an automatic qualification slot for those tournaments. We just announced our prize pool for the upcoming invitational. It is going to be $250, so that'll be $250 paid down to 8th place. Everybody walking away in 8th place and up with at least $10. So definitely something to show on top of, bragging rights at how well you did at the invitational. There will also be a last chance qualifier for the invitational taking place on the last week of the season. It'll be on the Sunday after the weekly. For full details, you guys can go ahead and check out aReNGeeternal.com. We have the full graph there. And actually, instead of going into a break, I am happy to inform you all we do, in fact, have a backup match. We're going to get tvkelley on Shimmering Combry versus Angrychicken, who looks like he's on a version of Big Combry, if I had to take a guess. Maybe Aggro Combry, though.
Yeah, let me check here. And as far as the game state goes, we see that tvkelley has 2 Xenonobelisks in play and then 2 flash creatures. So the Scorpion Wasp actually gets to eat something, right? Becomes a 3/3. He has enough of life total to kind of maybe stabilize this game despite being behind on board currently.
Yeah, he does look like he is quite behind, but it's going to matter a lot what Angrychicken can manage to pull up. tvkelley, though, with this Desert Marshal and hitting his 8th power, these are going to be very, very big units indeed. But we do see a Vanquish coming out of Angrychicken, and that puts tvkelley in a bit of a precarious situation. He will be able to block here, but he's still guaranteed to take 6 damage this turn, and he's going to need to come up with something big for his next turn.
Yeah, he needs to actually draw multiple things, because even if he draws another blocker, that's the 2 frogs still come through for lethal, and that Great Parliament probably does it. So I think it's Harsh Rule and Bust right here for tvkelley, and the Shimmer Pack, unfortunately, not going to do it.
Yeah, Harsh Rule or Bust indeed, and tvkelley not finding it, just going to find this Shimmer Pack, which he is at least able to transform the bird so he can block them, but not going to work out. We also see a frog being picked up, so cycling a card, and yeah, tvkelley just unable to block here. Curious to see what match we're in. I have a feeling this is game 3, and yeah, we see the GG well played. Yeah, see the GG well played come out. So looks like tvkelley, they're going down 1-2, unfortunately, to Angrychicken on what looks like a Big Combry list with those Great Parliaments in there. So Big Combry picking up a win over Shimmering Combry.
Yeah, that's always an interesting matchup. Big Combry is usually heavily reliant on Harsh Rule, but sometimes the Shimmering Combry deck just isn't able to draw party or assemble a threatening board, and then the random creatures in play are overpowered by the Mystic Ascendants, Seraphs, Parliaments.
Yeah, very often we do have that as the case. But yeah, round 2 is coming to a close, and with that, we are going to take a short break. So stay tuned, folks. We will be right back as soon as round 2 finishes up with coverage of round 3.
See you soon.